The moment Olani Afonja finally broke his silence, he did not begin with anger, nor with accusations. He began with the children. The children he had carried on his shoulders, defended in whispers, and introduced to the world as his own. In a voice weighed down by disbelief rather than rage, he admitted that the truth which shattered his marriage did not arrive as a sudden storm, but as a slow, merciless realization. The children he had loved and raised were not biologically his. That single sentence, spoken without theatrics, became the emotional epicenter of everything that followed. It reframed years of devotion into questions, transformed laughter into echoes, and turned memories once cherished into fragments he could no longer hold without pain. For years, Olani Afonja had lived inside a carefully protected silence. Known publicly for his humor and warmth, privately, he was navigating a marriage that appeared calm on the surface, while quietly eroding underneath. When he finally spoke about Hawawu Omolara Afonja, he did not paint her as a villain in simple strokes. Instead, he described a series of moments, small inconsistencies, unexplained absences, conversations that ended too quickly, that began to disturb the foundation of trust he had built with patience and pride. What hurt him most, he said, was not just betrayal, but the realization that his role as a father had been constructed on an illusion he never consented to. The marriage itself had lasted only 1 year on paper, but in emotional time it felt far longer. Within that year, Olani invested himself completely. Friends recall how he spoke of responsibility with reverence, how he embraced fatherhood not as an obligation, but as an identity. He paid school fees without hesitation, attended family gatherings with quiet dignity, and defended his household against gossip that often follows public figures. To him, fatherhood was not a biological transaction. It was a moral promise. That is why the truth, when it finally surfaced, did not simply end a marriage. It dismantled a belief system he had lived by. According to Olani's own admission, the truth did not come from confrontation, but from confirmation. A conversation led to another. A doubt demanded proof, and proof arrived with a finality that left no room for denial. He described the moment not as explosive, but as eerily calm, an internal collapse rather than a public scene. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit. Only a man sitting alone, replaying every memory with a different lens, wondering which moments were real and which were carefully staged. In that stillness, he realized that love, no matter how sincere, does not protect one from deception. His decision to leave Hawawu Omolara Afonja was not immediate. Olani spoke of hesitation, of nights spent staring at the ceiling, of weighing forgiveness against self-respect. He asked himself difficult questions. Does commitment require enduring dishonesty? Is staying a sign of strength, or a surrender of dignity? What does it mean to walk away from children you love, even when the truth says they were never yours? These questions did not seek answers. They demanded endurance. And in enduring them, Olani found that the silence he had maintained was slowly destroying him. When he finally chose separation, it was not framed as revenge or escape. It was framed as survival. Olani admitted that remaining in the marriage meant living a lie twice over, once to the world and once to himself. The divorce, though painful, became the only space where honesty could exist. He acknowledged the guilt that followed, especially toward the children who had done nothing wrong, children who still saw him as a father regardless of blood. That contradiction between emotional truth and biological fact became the heaviest burden he carried. What makes Olani Afonja's confession resonate so deeply is not the scandal itself, but the restraint with which he tells it. There is no attempt to sensationalize, no desire to reclaim public sympathy. Instead, he speaks as a man reckoning with the cost of loyalty in a world where trust can be quietly rewritten. His voice carries exhaustion rather than bitterness, reflection rather than blame. He admits that the betrayal did not just come from a spouse, but from time. Time that allowed a false narrative to grow roots in his life. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that this was never just about infidelity. It was about identity, about a man who built himself around the idea of being a protector, a provider, a father, only to discover that the foundation of that identity had been altered without his consent. Olani does not ask the audience to judge Hawawu Omolara staring at a floor that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that presses against the ears, reminding a man of everything that used to fill the space. What struck those closest to him was how often Olani paused mid-gesture. A hand hovering over a cup of tea. A phone unlocked, then locked again without a message sent. These pauses were not dramatic, but they carried weight. They were moments where memory interrupted the present, where the image of a child's laughter, a school uniform folded neatly, or a bedtime promise collided with the reality he now had to live with. In those seconds, the audience is no longer observing him. They are standing beside him, holding their breath, waiting for him to move again. He spoke of the children without naming them, as if names would make the loss sharper. He remembered small things, how one of them always fell asleep during car rides, head tilted slightly to the left, how another insisted on tying his shoes twice, for luck. These details mattered because they were real. They were the evidence of love that could not be erased by biology. Olani admitted that walking away from the marriage did not mean walking away from the memories, and that contradiction haunted him more than anger ever could. At night, he said, sleep became negotiable. He would lie in the dark, listening to sounds he once ignored, the hum of electricity, the distant bark of a dog, the soft creak of furniture settling. Each sound reminded him that life was continuing, indifferent to his confusion. Sometimes he replayed conversations with Hawawu Omolara Afanja, not to rewrite them, but to understand where honesty had slipped away. Was it in a look that lingered too briefly? A question he didn't ask because trust felt safer than doubt? These reflections did not seek blame. They sought meaning. Olani described one afternoon when he opened a drawer and found drawings the children had made for him, crayon figures labeled simply Daddy. His hands trembled, not from shock, but from recognition. In that moment, he realized the cruelty of the truth was not just that it changed his past, but that it threatened to steal his right to grieve openly. How does a man mourn children who are alive, who still breathe somewhere in the same city, yet are no longer his to claim? He did not portray himself as a victim frozen in despair. There were moments, brief, almost shy, where resilience appeared. He returned to work, not because he felt strong, but because structure kept him upright. On set, between takes, he laughed out of habit, then fell silent when the laughter faded too quickly. Colleagues noticed how his eyes searched rooms differently now, as if he were constantly orienting himself in a life that had been rearranged without his consent. The most intimate detail he shared was not about betrayal, but about choice. He confessed that leaving was not the hardest decision. Staying would have been. Staying would have required him to accept a version of himself built on denial. In choosing to walk away, he chose uncertainty over false stability. That choice did not bring relief. It brought clarity, and clarity came with its own kind of pain. As the narrative deepens, the reader is no longer just listening to Olani's story. They are inhabiting his silence. They feel the hesitation before each sentence, the careful way he avoids absolutes. He does not say he was destroyed. He says he was changed. He does not say he hates. He says he understands too much now. These distinctions matter because they reveal a man who is still processing, still negotiating with his own emotions rather than presenting them as conclusions. There is a particular moment, he recounts, standing at a traffic light, watching a father adjust his child's backpack. Nothing dramatic happens. The light turns green. Cars move on. But Olaniyi remains suspended in that image, feeling both invisible and exposed. It is in moments like this that the story breathes, drawing the reader into a shared humanity where loss is not loud, but constant. He admits that some days he feels anger rising unexpectedly, only to dissolve into sadness before it can find a target. Other days, he feels nothing at all, and that emptiness frightens him more than pain. He wonders aloud whether healing is supposed to feel like this. Uneven, unfinished, resistant to timelines. He does not offer answers. He allows the questions to remain, hanging between sentences. Through these small, precise details, Olaniyi Afanja becomes more than a headline or a confession. He becomes a man standing in the aftermath of truth, trying to relearn how to occupy his own life. The story does not rush toward resolution. It lingers in the spaces between breaths, in the ordinary gestures that now carry extraordinary weight, inviting the reader to stay with him in this unresolved moment, where love, loss, and identity are still quietly unfolding. There are parts of Olaniyi Afanja's story that he deliberately leaves unfinished, not because he does not remember them, but because remembering too clearly would force answers he is not yet ready to give. He admits this quietly, almost as a confession within the confession. Some truths, he says, reveal themselves only when you stop chasing them, and so he lets certain details remain blurred, suspended between what was said and what was merely sensed. One such detail is the exact moment he realized that suspicion had turned into certainty. He never names the day. He never describes the setting fully. He only mentions a feeling, a tightening in the chest that refused to loosen even when logic told him everything was fine. It was the kind of feeling that arrives uninvited and lingers long after you've tried to explain it away. He followed routines, smiled in public, played his role convincingly. Yet beneath that was the truth hidden, or was it overlooked, because belief felt safer? He recounts moments that seem ordinary on the surface, but feel charged with unspoken meaning. A conversation interrupted by a phone call that was never explained, a sudden change in routine dismissed as coincidence, a smile that arrived half a second too late. These are not accusations. They are impressions, and Olani treats them with caution, as if naming them too directly might distort their significance. By withholding certainty, he preserves the tension that defined his inner life during that time. Even the decision to leave is presented without finality. Olani does not describe a clear turning point, no dramatic line crossed. Instead, he speaks of accumulation, of weight added gradually until standing still became more painful than stepping into the unknown. He implies that there were conversations left unfinished, questions left unasked, and perhaps answers that were never offered. Whether this was by choice or circumstance, he does not clarify. There is also the matter of forgiveness, which he mentions only in passing. He does not say whether he has forgiven or plans to. He suggests that forgiveness, like truth, cannot be rushed without losing its meaning. Some wounds, he hints, demand time not to heal, but to be understood. And understanding, in his case, remains incomplete. As the story continues, Olaniyi appears less interested in explaining the past than in observing its aftermath. He notices how people now look at him differently, some with pity, others with curiosity, a few with uncomfortable silence. He does not correct their assumptions. He allows them to exist, much like he allows unanswered questions to exist within himself. This restraint keeps the narrative open, resisting the neat closure audiences often expect. There are hints, subtle, almost imperceptible, that more remains unsaid. A brief pause before answering certain questions, a change in tone when specific years are mentioned, a sentence that begins confidently, then trails off. These moments suggest that the full truth may not be singular, or even fully accessible yet. Perhaps it never will be. In maintaining this ambiguity, Olaniyi Afanja does not offer resolution. He offers proximity. He invites the reader to sit with uncertainty, to feel the discomfort of not knowing everything, to recognize that some stories unfold not toward answers, but toward deeper questions. And somewhere within that unresolved space, between memory and silence, between love and doubt, the story continues to breathe, quietly, insistently, refusing to reveal all its secrets just yet. As time stretches forward, Olani Afonja no longer tries to measure his life in clear before and after lines. The truth, once spoken, did not close a chapter the way people imagine confessions should. Instead, it loosened something inside him, like a knot partially untied, leaving threads still tangled, still resisting order. He moves through days with a new awareness that clarity does not always arrive as relief. Sometimes it arrives as a heavier silence. There are mornings when he wakes convinced that he understands everything now. On those days, the pain feels contained, almost manageable. He makes tea, watches steam rise from the cup, listens to the world beginning without him. But there are other mornings, more frequent than he admits, when understanding slips away again. When the questions return without warning, not loud enough to demand answers, but persistent enough to follow him through every room. He has learned not to chase them. He lets them trail behind him like shadows that lengthen and shorten depending on the light. He notices how memory has changed shape. Certain moments have sharpened. The feel of a small hand slipping into his. The weight of a child asleep against his chest. The sound of laughter spilling through a doorway. Other memories have faded, as if his mind has decided they are too dangerous to hold clearly. He does not try to recover them. He suspects that forgetting, in this case, may be a form of mercy, or perhaps another kind of loss. He is no longer sure which. When people ask how he is doing now, he answers carefully. Not because he wants to hide the truth, but because the truth itself has become unstable. Some days he feels lighter, as if honesty has removed a burden he carried too long. Other days he feels exposed, as if speaking out has stripped him of the last protection he had against his own thoughts. Both feelings coexist, and he has stopped trying to decide which one is more real. The children, always the children, remain present in ways that defy logic. He does not see them, does not speak of arrangements or boundaries, yet they appear in ordinary moments. A pair of shoes left by the door that are not his, a cartoon jingle drifting from a neighbor's television, a passing remark that begins with the word Dad. He never explains what these moments do to him. He simply acknowledges that they arrive, and that he lets them pass without resistance, unsure whether holding on would hurt more than letting go. There are times when he wonders if the truth he uncovered is complete. Not in the sense of missing facts, but in the sense of missing meaning. Was betrayal the central wound, or merely the surface of something deeper that had been forming long before he noticed? He considers this question often, then sets it aside, aware that some reflections lead not to insight, but to endless circles. He has learned to recognize when thought becomes another form of punishment. In quieter moments, he reflects on identity. For so long, he knew who he was through roles: husband, father, provider, protector. Now those roles exist in fragments, partially intact, partially dismantled. He has not replaced them yet. He suspects that rushing to define himself